I'm going to go ahead and call to order the July 17th Executive Committee meeting of the WTA Board of Directors. We have on the agenda 4 items. One of them is an annual process. It's discussion of the approval of the Transportation Development Plan. Mr. Wilder, do you want to introduce this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So this is our annual Transit Development Plan, affectionately known as TDP. This is something that's required by the state statute. So all transit agencies have to prepare one every year. It covers 6 years of planning. And really the primary purpose of this is to inform the state legislature of activities and plans of the various transit agencies. So, and each of the transit agencies use it for different reasons. Some just basically check off the boxes. Some actually use it for serious planning purposes. Our TDP contains background information about the agency, our 2021 activity, some of the significant things we did in 2021. And then it contains performance measures and consistency with other plans, such as local plans, state plans. And then most importantly, it identifies 6 years of operations, capital, and budgeting information. And I think that's probably the most important part of this for our efforts. It doesn't really identify any new stuff. It's mostly kind of recaptures all the information from other plans, including the capital improvement program. But I did want to highlight one section for you, and that was the operations section that is on page, I should have had the page identified here. Hold on a sec. On page 30, planned operating changes. That's a section that we haven't had much information on. And we spent a lot of time this year filling out the 6-year operating plan based on WTA 24-hour long-range transit plan. So that's kind of new stuff. It's not new service changes. Those were all as part of the long-range plan, but it is now captured in a 6-year plan that we didn't have before. And then the final note I want to make is that we had one typo that came up. It's on page 17, and it's the number of vehicles that are we have in service. And we had a miscount on the number of 40-foot buses, probably because of the year, from 42 to 41. And then paratransit vehicles, there was a typo. We actually doubled the number of gasoline vehicles, so it's actually 25 and not 50. So we'll make those changes for the final report for next week. So you'll have the final version of that. And with that, happy to answer any questions you might have.
Board members? Do we need a motion to recommend approval for the full board?
Yes, I think that's what, yeah, we would need a recommendation for full board approval, pending any public comments that we get. We haven't received any public comments to date, but we do have a hearing next week, so we could potentially get some in then.
All right, I'll move that we recommend the transit development plan to the full board with the minor edits we've seen.
I will second.
Any further discussion? I have a question. This is a 30-some page document. Are most TDPs about that length? And the reason why I'm asking is it might be instructive if staff could identify 1 or 2 equivalent agencies. And I think I might want to take a look at their TDPs, unless they're big, long documents, in which case I don't care.
Well, Michael, they do vary in length. I think Spokane's is probably the lengthiest. I've researched many of the different TDPs, and they do vary in length, but I'd be happy to share various copies, and then you can decide whether or not you want to read them. We had, and most of those are posted on their website, so they're easy to obtain, but I'd be happy to share maybe a sampling with you if you'd like to take a look at those.
Yeah, maybe an email with links or something. I don't know
Sure.
if the rest of the board would be interested in seeing those links. I really would just be perusing them quickly, looking for similarities and differences. Is it just me or somebody else also maybe want to take a peek? It may just be me. Okay. Asad Paul, I see your hand up.
Yes. Good morning, everybody.
My question is probably Shonda or somebody on page 32, the operating revenue losses in 2027, how we go from 38 million plus this year to 18 million negative in 5 years. So, it may not be the complete overall snapshot of total finances. This is just the operating, but maybe let's talk about it a little bit.
Sure, that is the full operating expenditures based on our projections. So there's a number of assumptions that we built into the TDP, but traditionally operating expenses are outpacing and continue to outpace the operating revenues. Even with the federal money that we've received, WTA has plans to go ahead and reimburse ourselves for those expenditures, but it is primarily our salaries and wages and benefits expense that is growing at a larger rate than the operating expenditures. And in the past, when that's occurred, we've been able to backfill that with our reserves. But with the 6-year plan we have between capital and operating, those reserves become depleted and the operating revenues can't keep up with expenditures. So we'll be faced with a question that we've talked about many times in the past. We just haven't had to answer it yet, is how do we do that? How do we keep our revenues growing, whether it's a sales tax increase, which we have the capacity to do. We've talked about increasing fare revenue in the past. And I know we're talking about zero fares now. Really, at this point, we are reliant on grants and other types of discretionary expenditures to cover that gap.
Yeah, I mean, if I see that the wages being one of the things operating, the increase, what are the other things increasing? Is it, have you put inflation in there? I'm sorry, I did not look through this more detailed. I just glanced in this morning, and I'm sorry, I should have done some more detailed work on this.
No worries.
I'm just expecting that's a substantial, say, from 38 to minus 18, that's about $50 million gap. We are looking at it in 5 years. We are losing $10 million a year, give and take, right? And that's substantial for the amount of budget we have. What are the main factors in your mind? Wages is one.
I think wages is the largest one, and no worries about not looking at this ahead of time. I'm happy to talk about it. Wages is the big one, and we're currently working with Vanessa and the HR team on the contract that we're negotiating and trying to decide how does CPI figure out in that. And you'll be hearing next week in a closed session some of those ideas that we've come up with. So we've got CPI there. We have a growing workforce. And some of the employees that we're looking at growing in our base are non-represented employees, which come in at a higher salary base. And we're also looking at increase in benefits at about 8%. So those are the big pieces. And as we negotiate the contract, all of those increases continue to build and compound year over year. We did have a conservative estimate of sales tax. We did just budget that at 5% every year. We've been seeing larger than normal increases these past few months, but we are hearing from some other agencies that they're starting to see their receipts decline, which might be hinting at the recession. So it is a very conservative estimate, but we wanted to program those wage interpretations. And then really for all of our other expenditures, we interpreted like a 2 to 3% increase. However, with Mike's guidance, we're going to have to look at fuel. So fuel's increasing a lot more than we anticipated. Also is the cost of our capital. So our capital dollars will not go as far as we expected them to do, particularly with bus purchases. But Satpal, I don't have all of the details right in front of me either. So I'd be happy to look and get back to you. But that was really based on the 5-year projection, the 6-year projection based on what we have going on internally.
There's another point is two things. One is that I'm here at the executive committee meeting. I thought there was something on the agenda I needed to talk about, and that was probably that if we can combine these meetings, that was my understanding. So I wasn't up for this discussion. But second thing is, I suggest that that we should spend a meeting on this. Make this topic as something that we should be all aware of. What the facts are, what they are, right? But I think that it is still 5 years away from us, but that's not very far. So my suggestion is that we should take this page seriously and have some discussion on it in future, whatever, next month, 2 months, whenever we can have some time. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll be prepared to talk about that further. And I think some things that you'll hear later on in this meeting might help inform some of those figures that you're seeing also.
Shonda, when will the board get a first look at the budget preparations?
I believe, boy, we just looked at our calendar. I believe October is the first reading for the board, but we can certainly start to, we just started our planning and our kickoff yesterday, but we can plan in September if you'd like to have some preliminary information, some of the assumptions that we're going under, and start to kind of piecemeal it into the board. I want to be careful to not have you hear it and listen to it too many times so it gets stale. But our first formal reading is scheduled for October 20th.
I do think, yeah, a September high level look at sort of the trends and assumptions, the overall picture, even if all the numbers aren't, even if we don't even have any numbers really, kind of like more like the gross trends. I think we've done things like that before. I think you called it like a budget outlook or something like that.
Yep. Okay, I'll be prepared to do that in September.
Scott, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I was looking at that. Good catch, Stat Paul, on that. Facilities, okay, 8.2 million in 23 and nearly 5 million in 26. Those are big line items. I guess what are we doing next year and what are we doing a couple of years out?
Mike, do you want to speak to that?
Mike, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. We're doing a lot of design work for the north lot and downtown station. And I can't think of off the top of my head. I don't have it in front of me. What projects are on there?
The big things are the development of the north lot and an expansion of Moab. Moab was built for a 20-year cycle. We're at the 20 years now. And so things here, those are the two large expenditures that I remember for next year and the year after. Is
the construction of the transit center downtown included, or is that not in their budget yet?
Yeah, that's in there.
That's in there as well. And the scoping of that, so that's kind of a placeholder. That's one that's we'll have to see as we scope that, whether it's operational adding bays or do we go vertical and do other things with it. One of the things on here too that this highlights is, our revenue sources are pretty much dependent on sales tax, which is a pretty fickle way to go forward. And one of the things we'll talk about a little bit later as we're talking through the strategic thinking kind of discussion is doing equitable transit supported development. Is that a way to diversify some of our revenue sources? So is there a way to do ground leases or other things that provide some consistent revenue that doesn't go up and down like a sales tax potentially could, as we all saw in 08, 09, what happened there and how that affected things. So trying to think through, are there ways to diversify some of that revenue sourse as well, Scott, with bringing a community benefit. Sorry,
Les. Scott, do you have more on this at the moment?
No, that's good overview. Thanks. And it sounds like we're going to talk about it again. So
yeah, we're in a weird position in that kind of in sort of short-term one-time monies. We're looking good for the nearest term, which is different from the long term. Is that Paul, you raise your hand again?
Yeah, I just have one comment, Michael, if I may. that I remember just not too long ago, we were facing that how are we going to spend down our reserves? we were finding ways to spend the money.
Yep.
And here it is. It's less than 10 years.
Yep. And that is one of the things that, well, we'll be talking a little bit later too, is this tees it up well, is as we were talking through, do we spend down those one-time money reserves on going all electric, for example? Is that the best, most strategic way to do that? Or do we incrementally approach that while we're trying to tackle some of these other things like transit supported development and a potential BRT and those kinds of things that also have partnership and federal dollars that come along with it to supplement to do that. And so our strategic financing becomes very important, but we need to have that kind of mission. What's our vision first? And then we can align with that. And so the electric bus was a great example. Do we spend all our money on electric buses quickly, or do we incrementally approach it and do these other things as well? Because as you can see, it'll drain us pretty quick.
So the motion before us has to do with improving the TDP. I really appreciate Satpal, you being here and highlighting those financial issues. Scott too. Is there any further discussion on the motion to recommend approving the TDP? If not, if there are no objections, I'll consider the motion passed unanimously. Are there any objections? Hearing none, that's passed. Thank you, everyone. Good discussion. The next item on here, oh, excuse me, wrong document. Discussion of setting the public hearing for the Title VI plan. Again, I think this is a relatively routine matter. Ms. Anderson, do you want to introduce this?
Yes, thank you. So transit properties that receive federal funds are required to submit an updated Title VI report every 3 years. And so we're asking the board or the executive committee to recommend to the board of directors to set a public hearing at the September 15th meeting. And the draft document is not yet ready. However, we do need to get the public hearing set. The draft document will be ready for you and the public to review by September 1st.
Okay, looking for a motion to recommend setting the hearing to the full board.
So moved. Second.
Would you mind if we put that on consent agenda?
Is there any objection? Okay, I see no objection. The motion before us is to recommend approval of a Title VI hearing in September. If there are no objections, I'll consider it passed unanimously for going forward to the consent agenda. Are there any objections? Hearing none, that will go on the consent agenda with a recommendation for approval. Next, another routine matter, expenditures for the month of June.
Move approval to the full board.
Second.
And is that okay for everyone if that goes on the consent agenda as well? Is there any further discussion? Is there any objection? If there's no objection, the motion is passed unanimously. Hearing no objection, that'll go forward, the recommendation for approval on the consent agenda. And then finally, another discussion, which is the WTA 2040 strategic alignment discussion. Mr. Reardons.
Yes, sir. And this kind of just picks up where we left off. So appreciate folks being here, and Satpal, thank you for coming for this one too, because I think it's a big discussion, one that will continue, but trying to set the foundation. So let me see if I can go ahead and share my screen here, which if I can will be a success. Can folks see that? Okay, now let me get it into, see if I can get it into presentation form. Okay, can you see that okay?
Yeah, but it's not in presentation form. We're seeing your everything.
Okay, let's see.
Do you have more than one screen?
If you can hit the slideshow button, I think that'll do the trick.
That's what brought this up.
Yes, I'd recommend unsharing and then doing a new share now that you've got it in slideshow.
Okay.
Mr. Nylander is earning his keep this morning.
Well, can you see that?
The screen hasn't changed.
Hasn't changed. Okay. Let's
I'm
see.
open.
And slideshow. And let me go to stop share. Okay. Let me try that again. Sorry about this technology. Okay. Okay, let me share a different screen, see if that works.
Yay. Looks good.
Does that do it? Okay. All right. So, okay, that's good. That's my one good thing I'm gonna do for the day. I'm done. Thank you. Okay. So the intent of this discussion is kind of to piggyback off of what we had already started talking about. Is it started out as we were talking about, we have some reserves, one-time money that's gone into the reserves, and do we spend that money on, the initial question was with the diesel buses or electric, and spend that. And as that started, discussion started evolving, and we started looking at the strategic financing out into the future, we started noticing exactly what we talked about and where that was going. And so it started thinking, okay, how do we align better? What's our strategic vision, where we're going, and then how do we align that together? So that's what started it out. So as we're going through, this is hopefully meant to be a discussion. So please, as we're going through, let me know. I can't see everybody's screen, so if people just hop in, that would be great, because I can't see hands necessarily. So we're at this point. Some initial thoughts is we were trying to think through, and in discussions with the board since at least last year, and then through 2040 WTA 2040 discussions, kind of just summarizes, you know, are we organized and postured to meet the demands of a changing operating environment that we're in? And what does that mean by the operating environment? So to give some examples of that, there are changing expectations that are out there, things we learned through WTA 2040. There's funding opportunities that are there. There are problems that are facing us as a community that cut across those jurisdictional boundaries, that it's not a siloed approach, and one entity may not be able to solve some of these complex problems that we're dealing with. And so those solutions will be interdependent across organizations. And then, you know, one of the other things we were trying to think through is traditionally and historically, WTA has approached things with a kind of defined toolbox of service, of fixed route or paratransit or zone service, or, you know, trying to look at it through that lens. And the way things are changing, the expectations are going, is trying to think through a different, broader lens that doesn't mean a pivot away from service by any stretch of the imagination, but are there other things that we can add to that toolbox to help enhance our community and make us a better place? And some of the things why we're driving, when I talk about that future operating environment and the changing expectations, just a few things at the federal government level. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg has quote unquote said transit is changing, and talks about things about thinking about every dimension of a trip, and using design and planning solutions to reduce the necessity of trips. And then when people do take trips, that they are able to do it in different modes. He has challenged us to, quote unquote, break us out of the old paradigm of how we get around, and to, quote unquote, look at a variety of options that are emerging, including BRTs, micro mobility, equitable transit oriented development, or in our case would probably be more transit supported development. And he talks about how housing and transportation policy have to fit together, and that transit oriented development is a climate change opportunity as well. And then one of the things that got me thinking too was how he was talking about in my term, holistic or whole of government approach, and saying that these problems are going to require full alignment of city, county, state, federal agencies to do that. Again, recognizing that that these problems, housing, childcare, whatever it happens to be, are not siloed, and we're going to have to reach cross jurisdictions to do that. At the state level, Move Ahead Washington, the legislature defined that in the transit aspect of a quote unquote systemic change. The urbanist, and after doing a bunch of interviews with state lawmakers on that, indicated that quote unquote lawmakers hope this will lead to a culture of transit riding and making transit the right choice for many. And they went on to talk about the various ways, whether that's BRT, micro bus rapid transit, micro mobility, land use planning, and transit being more coordinated to make those transit options more reliable and convenient. Interestingly, the American Public Transit Association president had a quote that said that we've never been in a stronger or yet more challenging place, facing a variety of hurdles. And he says we must prepare for a future of reinvention, and that stakeholders are expecting future public transit projects to deliver big benefits to our communities, and that our future depends on smart strategic decisions. So that led to, kind of looking back at our mission, trying to synthesize, okay, what's the board direction and intent, so that we as staff can bring you something that is executable, is that transformational that we heard the board talk about, and is strategic. And so this was an attempt on, you'll see on the slide, to try to kind of synthesize down what we thought we heard the board talking about, and that's thinking differently, thinking holistically to solve community problems, to meet our mission of enhancing our community through those four means of service, environmental, innovation, and partnerships. To show our value proposition to the community, we've talked a little bit about showing a community-based return on investment, not necessarily a financial return on investment, but rather how do we show that community-based return on investment while being sustainable financially into the future. And then, of course, whatever this approach is that we take has to be specific and strategic, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. And so as we were going through 2040 and looking at those things, trying to think that through, okay, what is actually executable, what's actionable that we can actually deliver in a specific time frame. And that's what led to the 2040. So that bottom line that we're trying to look at is, okay, how do we think differently to make our community better and solve these community problems in a coordinated and synchronized across government approaches, so we're not siloed. You look at how Washington State has set up our governmental system, and we've got general purpose districts, cities, counties, they have a wide variety, and then special purpose districts that were set up, whether that's transit or hospital districts, water, sewer, fire districts, so forth, to supplement those things. And what, and this is just my opinion, what that's kind of led us to is a very siloed approach on things. And so what we're trying to do, and based on the board's direction to us, is how do we think across, what can we bring to that table in a joint and coordinated way with other governments to solve these problems. So that led to, okay, what's our problem statement? What are we trying to do? Reminding ourselves again that our North Star, what we're trying to do is enhance our community through those four lines of effort and those bullets. And so looking at, okay, there are community issues that we may be able to help solve in that whole of government. How can we use our strengths and leverage our strengths with the other governmental entities, and potentially privates and nonprofits as well, to make our community better? And so some of those issues that we were thinking about that are going is housing. And housing has various components, whether we're talking houseless folks, or we're talking workforce housing, or we're just talking that middle market where somebody who makes $70,000-$80,000 a year can't afford a median house in Whatcom County. So how do we do those kinds of things? Looking at our senior, thinking equitably and gracefully aging in place. Thinking about economic development aspects of things, childcare, community attractiveness, that people, particularly as generations come up, they're going to want more and more alternative ways of getting around. The housing and economic development, climate, obviously, what we can do internally, our facilities, our fleet, those things, but then also how do we encourage, as Secretary Pete Buttigieg was talking about, how do we encourage trip to use other things as opposed to vehicles? And that doesn't necessarily have to be 100% shift, but rather how do we do that to encourage? And then the equity side of it, our low income populations, our zero car households that rely on transit to get around, people of color, those with disabilities, and so forth. And those are complex issues to try to get around, and transit can help on those, but it's got to be in my humble estimation, it's got to be a coordinated effort across government. So we're integrating with land use, and we're integrating with these other services as well to make it work. And so then one of the things that, as we were talking about, I'm sorry, but I feel this foundational discussion is good as we move into it, to make sure we're kind of all in the same, at least in the same chapter. So talking through, what would be our approach? Well, we talked about the kind of whole of government approach to attack these complex issues. Doing it in a get real, get better mindset. And what I mean by that, and embrace the red mindset, is I think so many times we focus on, if you think of that stop chart, and how we brief things, red, yellow, green, we focus a lot of times on getting to the green and talking about the green aspect of things, because it feels good about, hey, we're doing these things. But a lot of times those green things will keep going, and we need to focus on those. But focusing on those red, what are those things that are challenges, those barriers that we can't seem to get those things to make a real difference? And thinking that through and embracing that, let's talk about those. What are those barriers? How can we do that? So for example, looking at the Linden Park and Ride and thinking about, okay, the Park and Ride was something that we tried 20 years ago, and has it really worked? And so embracing that red, challenging ourselves to think through, okay, that may be tough to think, okay, we thought this would work, but has it really worked? And if not, how do we have a higher and better use for that property to accomplish our goals, and thinking that way. And then, making sure that we're additive, because I don't want it to be perceived like, if we're doing transit oriented or transit supported development, we're pivoting away from service. Service is still important. It's kind of the yes, and are there other things that we can do to tie that service together? And I'm sorry, Paul, I saw your hand.
Yeah, let me add to that. It's a great discussion, and I really appreciate your problem statement and talking about the whole government approach. Let me share some of these things. Maybe many people know, or many people do not know, that let's talk about your issues, housing and childcare or economic development. I think these are, and just for everybody's knowledge, when we got the ARPA money, $44.5 million, we have allocated 50% of that money directly into these two things, low-income housing and childcare, and we have distributed probably $8 or $10 million out of that already. And the rest will be done fairly soon, because these projects do take time. But the same thing, I really want to give kudos to WTA, that when last year came up the project for the radio acquisition, that license acquisition, and WTA stood up and said, okay, that we can do that. And that's like a really holistic approach, the government approach, whereas it could have been city and county's problem, not exactly WTA's problem to invest that kind of money. But I think that is a really good approach. And your thoughts about Railroad Avenue, the downtown Bellingham station, and Linden Park and Ride. I think that's another two holistic things. And I just want to say that if these things do mature in short term, county would be willing to put money into those, both the projects in some way or the other, either through EDI money, or if we have some ARPA money left, or the allocations we have made. We have to make that decision by December 2024. It's still a couple of years away, but if there is a way to do that, I think it can be done. Now, let me talk a little bit about climate. It is a great subject, and we know it is very real, and it is impacting us. And it's not like as Whatcom County or United States, it is impacting the whole globe. And my observation is sometimes, we look at the globe, then we look at United States, then we look at Washington State, then we look at Whatcom County, 250,000 people. And it's very difficult to judge when we are overdoing it and we are underdoing it. It become emotional also, how much we contribute, or we take that pain in a smaller community to make a bigger difference, right? There is no easy way to balance that we are doing right about what we should be doing, right? Even if we say we're going to go zero emissions in Whatcom County tomorrow, what difference would it make? We should keep that perspective. I'm not hedging that, okay, people are gonna call me, oh, he's anti-climate or something. That's fine if somebody gonna call me that. But I'm just saying is, where is the balance? Because the way our nation, our governance is, there is no central policy. There should be a central policy, but the people and the top cannot agree on that. And that division comes down, and we are the lowest levels of the government, and we are putting straight jackets on ourselves and putting ourselves into knots to achieve something. How does this impact? So I just wanted that we should always be cognizant of that. How much is what we can make a difference. I really think that this approach, if all the other bodies and in the government, in all the other districts and PUDs and ports and other organizations start thinking like this, I think this will be a great thing, because just a county or a city government cannot just do it all. So I just wanted to add that and give kudos to WTA board and WTA organization to stand up and be actually real about it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, there's a book, The Power of Crisis, that essentially looks at climate and artificial intelligence and so forth, and these things are coming that will fundamentally change us, and talks about those things don't respect borders, and how we historically have always thought about things nationalistically in our borders, and so that caused to think about these government silos that that we're not going to be able to tackle these complex problems without trying to leverage each other's strengths, and how can we cover each other's weaknesses, because we all have various things in a coordinated approach. There's in the Business Pulse that just came out, Don Goldberg from the Port on Economic Development was talking about these as economic development issues, and how they're hampering his ability to do that and affecting from an economic development standpoint, and talks about how we're in this together and how we need to deal with this together on things. So I think there's good movement forward and an opportunity here for us. So I apologize for spending a lot of time on the foundational part, but I thought that was important to make sure we were all in agreement on how we were moving forward and the foundational problem statement, so that then we know how to tackle what that is. So in looking at some of our programs that we at WTA can do, again, we're trying to think through this transformation coordinated things and implementing through our WTA 2040, and looking at our mission statement of enhance our community through service, environment, innovation, partnerships. Here are some of the things that we can do and take a programmatic approach to these, which then goes back to the financing and budget that we were talking about earlier, thinking these through on how do we do this, and looking at our budget from what are those mandatory expenses that we have, paying people and keeping our buses out and fuel and those kinds of things. And then what are those things where with those monies that are left, how do we leverage those through grants and partnerships and innovation to get after these programmatic kinds of things. One of the things that is the changing operating environment is we do have over the next 3-4, I guess it's 5 years in the federal and what till 2016, knock on wood, presuming assumption wise that budget remains. We have some funding opportunities to be able to try to leverage those dollars to move towards these things. So these are the programs based on what we talked about and learned from WTA 2040 that we could move forward and operate or try to implement to get after these larger complex problems. So, looking at the service component and looking at the transit supported land use and transit supported development, those things can work together. So for example, at the Bellingham station, you put in transit supported development, you put in childcare. It allows people to, if you're working at Faith Life downtown, you can take a bus, drop your kid at childcare right at the bus station, go down, work, come back, pick up your kid. And it encourages people to say, why do I need a car? So you got the climate aspect of it. And so there's many things that can work together. Hopefully that stimulates economic development and helps, with the downtown core in Bellingham at least, and those kinds of things. So I'm sorry, I see Jen's hands up.
So, just thinking about this transit orientated development, I know we're starting to talk at City Council about our comp plan updates. Is WTA planning on becoming involved in some of that overview or review of those comp plans? Because that's really where cities indicate that they're growing and where future development is going to be.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we would like to do is to be more coordinated. And as Secretary talked about, having the land use planning and transit fit together so that we're part of the process as opposed to at the end. One of the things I think we find, and Tim can jump in and correct me, is some developers, of course, they just want maximum return on investment. Others are willing to, and the majority are willing to work, but it's at the more of the beginning stage when they're trying to figure out how they're going to lay it out, as opposed to the end when then we say, oh, we need to, take some land and put some turnouts in or something. It's awful difficult for them when they've already, done their pro forma and figured it out. So allowing us to be able, to get involved. Blaine, we know, has a huge development going in potentially over the next few years. How do we get involved at the beginning of those things? I can't see Tim, but hopefully he's not glaring at me and I said something wrong. But Tim, if you have anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, I was a great question, Jen. I was gonna mention that we actually talked about that as part of WTA 2040 and have acknowledged the need to be involved early in the planning process, and that starts with the comprehensive plans. So we added actually a strategy in WTA 2040 to be able to do that, so we can have at least the policy background for moving forward and working with the local jurisdictions. And in a couple of cases, we've reached out to folks, but yeah, we look forward to those conversations being a seat at the table somewhere, right? To be able to talk about what our needs are to be successful for transit, but also what the community needs are for transit services. So it goes both ways, I think.
And I'm just wondering if that conversation and getting involved in that needs to happen sooner rather than later, because I know we're looking at growth in Everson, and we're growing south along Everson Goshen. That's going to be the primary area of our growth, which is already a transit corridor, but we're looking at, potentially 60 acres that, we were talking about it. And if we were able to get it into our UGA and then annex it in the city, our thought is it would be fully built out in 5 to 10 years. So that it seems like that kind of growth is being projected throughout the county, and I'm just wondering if that needs to not be pushed back any. It needs to come forward if we really want to get in on the leading edge of this development.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we would welcome any opportunity to be there early in the conversations.
And I think that's it's a great example of how just naturally over time we have these various siloed approaches, not because anything's wrong. It's just, here's my boundary. This is what I work on. And so trying to think a little differently across and us, so that we're trying to make more of an effort. And the board had the foresight last year that we will be hiring somebody to with land use background to work with Tim. So we have not only the capacity or the capability, but the capacity to do these things and make a meaningful involvement. So yeah, thank you for that. Okay. I'll ask Shonda to help me out on this one, but what we tried to do here was take a look at over this planning horizon, what are these things, and try to simplify it. And we saw in the TDP thing as well, the main takeaway is that expenses do exceed revenues. So we need to be very strategic as we're developing a financing plan and look at various sources, and that's where partnerships and those kinds of things, thinking creatively. There's grant funds that are out there. We don't have any money in the revenue side on grants, but there are a lot of things. Paul, you kindly indicated on EDI funding and those kinds of things. Granted, that's not going to do a development, but it's trying to look at how do we piece together these things. And so in doing some due diligence and talking to a few developers around and nonprofits to try to see, is this a crazy, just transit supported development, a crazy idea and this coordinated? And they don't think so. They think it can be worked, and there's some interest there. So as we figure out, okay, this is where strategically we want to go with the organization and start aligning to that. There's some ways to start piecing together these things to make them work. There's a couple organizations I've talked to that do this and have done it up and down the West Coast, and with TriMet in the greater Portland area, Sound Transit, King County. Others, we're a little different because we're a little bit of a smaller. One I found is Eugene has done something like this. So there are ways to do this, but it will require us piecing together on the financing piece to do that. Shonda, I'll turn it over to you because you're much smarter on this stuff than I.
No, Les, I think you said it really well. And I think this does represent what we looked at the TDP with that big decrease in cash, with the expenses outpacing the revenues by about $85 million. As Les said, we didn't include any of the competitive grants in here because those are unknown. And so that those would alter this picture a little bit, but they may also introduce additional projects that we haven't captured in here. So we'll have that revenue and expense offset. We do have the FTA formula grants in here because those are a consistent revenue source, paying about 80% of our federal bus replacements. But just basically on the surface, this is really just keeping WTA running, this is what the financial picture looks like. And then we add in that capital initiatives in the WTA 2040, which point to some of the objectives that Les was talking about earlier achieving. And that adds another additional $36 million. So we wanted just to portray, here's a snapshot of this point in time with what we're thinking, what we're maybe anticipating the next 6 years, to open up some conversation about what else can we do? What can we do differently? One thing we've talked about is issuing bonds. I think you're all aware that WTA right now has a line of credit to help assist with bus purchases. But we've been talking with our attorney and another financing attorney about potentially issuing general obligation bonds. And what would that look like for WTA? We do have the authority to do that under the RCW. So that'll be, for example, a financing option that we could bring back to the board. How do we lever those dollars? How do we lever the cash that we have in the bank? Because there'll be some restrictions on those types of financing opportunities. But again, just putting in front of you, if we choose to move forward with WTA and achieving some of those objectives Les talked about, we'll have to be really strategic with our financing and become creative in looking at some other opportunities for revenues and or ways to maintain or contain our expenses. And that's been very challenging in the past, and it's more challenging as we are now with the CPI, the interest rates raising, and just the economic climate changing a little bit. Did I miss anything, Les, that you'd like to add?
No, that's great. I think the main takeaway from this is that we will have to be aggressive on the grants, which is why I'm trying to build that capability with Van Ness Feldman help, and trying to think it's a puzzle on how do we do this. And thanks to Shonda, we'll be thinking how do we strategically finance. So the budget will be transforming from kind of a yearly financial document into kind of, okay, how do we strategically approach these things, and how does financing work so that we can accomplish that? One of the other just line items on here to point out is the capital initiatives in WTA 2040, a large chunk of that. I think it was about 28 million or so of that is if we were to do a bus rapid transit. And of that, if we're successful in doing that and the needs there and all that, it's what, Tim, 80-20 split, 85-20?
Yeah, 80-20 split.
80-20 split. So of that, we'd be able to get, of that 28 million or so, we'd be able to get 80% of that. So these things will change, but the real takeaway from this slide is just to show we have a challenge to be able to implement those things. Scott?
Yeah, I guess when you talk about going out for financing and bonding things, if we're going to bond anything, it has to be long-term assets, not fleet assets, in my mind, because if you're borrowing to pay for fleet, you're just borrowing money from the future to take care of what you like today, and the future people have to replace those things as well.
Right.
But if you're going to do bus rapid transit, or if you're going to do facility type things, that I would consider bonding those. But anything that's a reoccurring expense, I would disagree with bonding. We're just kicking the can down the road then.
Yeah. Oh, Shonda, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, thank you for bringing that up. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. And I think that's what Cynthia Weed, as we're talking to her, that's kind of what she's saying too, is that while you have the authority to potentially do revenue bonds, it's really, and collateralizing and those kinds of things, it's really more general obligation to do things like a development project or something of that nature. And again, I don't think we're the right entity to actually build the project, but we can stimulate it, support it, and kind of make it so that it works for folks. So yeah, that's a great point. Oh, Mr. Lilliquist, I think your hand's up. I've got little tiny squares, so.
Yeah, thanks. So what I appreciate about this is that it's showing that WTA is sort of stretching and trying to be more than just a bus company. I think our community wants that. I'm pretty sure most board members get that we're more valuable to the community. If we look for ways around our core missions that nonetheless relate to our mission. So I appreciate the administration taking seriously this idea. I just want to say that I sometimes think even crazier and bigger. Yesterday, I was talking with Rick Larson's aide, Sean, and I was talking about right-of-way acquisition up and down I-5, right-of-way acquisition that can solve the fact that Amtrak relies upon tracks they don't own, that addresses DOT's problem, which is that I-5 through Bellingham is jammed up with Bellingham local cars who use it as an arterial, and the fact that a true bus rapid transit might require right-of-way acquisitions. And then a fourth problem, which is that when the highway was built through Bellingham in 1966, it cut off a lot of east-west connectors. And we've reestablished one of those going onto the highway. And there's another one that could reestablish the Maple Street alignment through Bellingham and also go onto the highway. These are, what I'm talking about is very large changes to the I-5 right-of-way. $500 million kind of projects that have to be federally supported and state supported. They're not Bellingham or they're not WTA. But I bring it up because I was trying to weave WTA bus rapid transit in there. The biggest challenge, I think, with a transformative transit system is to move away from relying upon surface streets that aren't necessarily built for transit as the main user. Well, bus rapid transit kind of needs some corridors, at least during key congested areas that are transit dedicated. Anyway, I just want to say I'm thinking really big. I don't know if any of you all are thinking that big, but WTA is one of the things that I factor in my mind when I'm trying to address these Whatcom County issues.
Something that rumbles around is you see the development around the Lincoln Creek area, and Western owns that property. So I'm not proposing anything, but that ties to the Maple Street that you're talking about, Michael. As that develops, there's real synergies there that you could develop that out from a transit standpoint. From transit supported development would be a great I think thing there, and there's development going on over the next couple of years that the synergies could be fantastic in something like that. And it would be that kind of coordinated, synchronized across the partners to make something like that happen. We'd all have benefits from it. And it certainly, Tim, I think from our perspective that if we were able to do something like that, would help with the bus rapid transit, right?
Oh, you're talking about crossing of I-5 in that location. Yeah, absolutely. That's a big time sink for us, is to cross over on to Samish and then get onto Lincoln Creek. We don't have any stops in that area, and so it takes quite a bit of time for us to cross over the interstate and go down to Lincoln Creek and areas beyond. So that would be a major improvement for us operationally, and then obviously better service. But I think the comment about the bus rapid transit that, Michael, that you made is a good one, and that's something we're going to be challenging our consultants to tell us if they think a bus rapid transit could operate without actually having a separate, busway. Is it feasible? Does it work the same way? And advise us if it's not possible or if it's not advisable, then that's the challenge comes back to us as local entities to be able to develop something like that. So that's going to be a future conversation I'm looking forward to having with this group and the community.
So in the last about 5 minutes that we have, I just wanted to highlight as well that this I saw when I was on Navy orders recently in the Middle East. There's a thing that says success is a journey, and that kind of resonated with me that we're on this journey and trying to create a WTA that is built for this purpose. And so that started thinking, okay, how would this change us? And so part of this discussion is to develop that shared understanding. What's our unity of effort and purpose that we're trying to do, so that then we can align all of our efforts to that. So for example, board commitment, the thing we'll talk about next week on going from executive committee to 2 board meetings, building capacity to have more substantive discussions as opposed to repeating things, so we can build that time into it. From an organization, our philosophy on stakeholder outreach and who those stakeholders are, and our communications with them, both messaging and rhythm, that we have those conversations. We talked a little bit about carrying debt and strategic financing and those kinds of things, which is different from the way we've thought in the past. Taking a look at our risk assessment and measuring that risk, and how do we mitigate those risks, and looking at opportunity costs, and how do we approach economic uncertainty, making sure that we don't have a split agency focus, as Michael mentioned, that we are still providing great service, and we're doing these things as well to increase that service, increase the climate, increase the ridership, increase each of our lines of effort for making our community better. Our philosophy on lack of a better term, patient capital, that we'll have to align, move forward, and these development projects take a little bit of time, as Paul was saying, to do. And so having that patience so that we can show those, but we can show and incrementally how we're making progress and success. Ensuring that organizationally we're aligned and designed to implement this, so that we have the right, when you think about an organization, right, you have to have capacity and capability and the systems and processes to understand what's working, what's not working, and do that. So making sure we're aligning. So if we have, if we're doing, working on these partnership agreements, making sure we're resourcing, do we need to have somebody who helps lead that project, which is a different thought process than what we have now. So aligning to that. So making sure we have the right jobs on that. So that could cause us to discuss or would cause us to bring back the capability development that we need on that, and whether that's employees or consultants or so forth on that. And then making sure we're measuring that success, the community return on investment. What is that financial return on investment? Can we structure some of these things to get a ground lease, for example, that allows us to use that money to roll into other future projects and things, and then provide a steady revenue source for us. We're solving those community issues in that Whatcom or WTA 2040 talked about those 3's, equity, environment, efficiency, and using those to measure us. And then that embrace the red mindset, constantly assessing what we're doing, being honest with ourselves, if it's working, if it's not, if our assumptions were wrong, how do we change, how do we readjust to still accomplish, and is that goal still valid? So I'll stop there because we're at our time frame. This could stimulate a lot of discussion. I anticipate this will. We all need to sit on it a little bit and think it through, and we'll build capacity to talk more about this into future meetings too. So I'll pause there for final discussions. And
go ahead and stop sharing the screen.
okay. Hey, that was a lot easier than sharing the screen.
Board members, any comments or thoughts at this moment? Okay, well, thank you very much for the presentation. Anything more or less?
Just one thing I saw, Skip would like the slides. Would all the board members like me to send the slides? Okay, I'll go ahead and distribute that then. Thank you for that suggestion, Skip.
Is there anything further for this executive committee meeting? Okay, Paul, I do want to again express appreciation for you showing up. This will now be a more regular thing for you, and we need your input, and also Mayor Fleetwood's in the future. Okay, seeing nothing more, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the executive committee meeting for WTA Board of Directors. Thank you, everyone.